She was sitting in Seat 1A of a $70 million Bombardier Global 7500, but she wasn't sipping champagne. She was in handcuffs. The pilot, a man with 20 years of flight experience, looked down at her and called her a threat to national security. He thought he was protecting a billionaire's asset. He thought he was a hero. But what Captain Roche didn't know was that the girl in the hoodie wasn't an intruder. She was the owner. And the black sedan racing across the tarmac outside? That wasn't the police. That was her father. And he was about to teach Captain Roche a lesson that money can't buy, but it can certainly enforce. The rain at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey didn't just fall. It felt like it was trying to scrub the tarmac clean of its sins. It was a grey, miserable Tuesday morning, the kind that made the flashing strobe lights of the private jets look like warning beacons in a storm. Parked at the far end of the Atlantic Aviation FBO was the crown jewel of the fleet, a Bombardier Global 7500, tail number N9990PB. It was sleek, terrifyingly expensive, and capable of flying from New York to Tokyo without stopping for breath. Captain Gregory Roche stood under the shelter of the jet's massive wing, checking the landing gear struts. Roche was a man who wore his uniform like a suit of armor. Every crease was sharp enough to cut paper. His epaulets were gold and gleaming, and his jaw was set in a permanent line of dissatisfaction. He was 55, ex-Air Force, and he treated civilian aviation with a mixture of disciplined professionalism and deep-seated arrogance. To Roche, passengers were usually an inconvenience, and the crew were subordinates to be managed. "Tires look low on the left main," Roche barked into his headset, his voice cracking over the wind. "Checked them 10 minutes ago, Cap. They're within limits." The voice of First Officer Timothy Wells crackled back. Wells was younger, softer, and perpetually terrified of Roche. "Check them again," Roche snapped, wiping rain from his forehead. "I don't pay you to trust the gauge. I pay you to know." Roche turned his back on the gear and scanned the perimeter. He was obsessive about security. In his mind, the world was on fire, and he was the gatekeeper. He'd read the briefings about tarmac intruders, climate protesters gluing themselves to runways, and the general decay of societal order. He was ready for anything. Or so he thought. Through the mist, a figure approached the aircraft. It wasn't the fuel truck. It wasn't the catering van. It was a person, walking on foot from the general direction of the perimeter fence, bypassing the main VIP terminal entrance entirely. Roche squinted. As the figure got closer, his internal threat meter spiked into the red. It was a girl. She looked barely 20. She was black, her hair pulled back in messy braids that were soaking wet. She wore an oversized, faded grey hoodie that swallowed her frame, baggy sweatpants with paint stains on the thigh, and battered sneakers. She had a canvas backpack slung over one shoulder and was looking down at her phone, walking toward the $70 million aircraft as if she were walking toward a bus stop. Roche stepped out from under the wing, his chest puffing out. This was exactly what he had warned the management company about. Lax security. Riff-raff wandering onto the tarmac. "Hey!" Roche's voice boomed, competing with the whine of an APU starting up on a nearby Gulf Stream. The girl didn't look up. She kept walking, her pace steady, heading straight for the airstairs that were lowered and waiting. Roche marched forward, intercepting her path. He moved with the aggressive speed of a man who enjoyed confrontation. "I said stop!" The girl finally looked up. She pulled a single earbud out of her ear. Her eyes were dark, calm, and utterly unimpressed. There was no fear in her face, which infuriated Roche instantly. Intruders should be scared. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost drowned out by the rain. "You can help me by turning around and getting on your knees with your hands behind your head," Roche spat, positioning himself between her and the stairs. "How did you get past the gate?" The girl, Jocelyn, blinked, water dripping from her eyelashes. "The gate? I just walked through the FBO. The lady at the desk waved me through." "Bullshit," Roche said, stepping closer. He towered over her. "The FBO doesn't wave through strays. This is a secure area. This is a private aircraft. You are trespassing on federal property." Jocelyn sighed, shifting her weight. She looked tired. "Look, I'm not trespassing. I'm supposed to be on this flight. I'm early, I know, but you're supposed to be on this flight?" Roche let out a short, incredulous laugh. He looked her up and down, making a show of inspecting her attire, the stained sweatpants, the hoodie, the beat-up sneakers. "On this jet? The only way you're getting on this bird is if you're here to scrub the toilet, and even then, catering uses the service entrance. Where's your ID? Where's your badge?" Jocelyn reached into her hoodie pocket. "Don't move!" Roche screamed, his hand instinctively dropping to his belt. He wasn't armed. Pilots couldn't carry guns on the tarmac, but the motion was threatening enough. "Hands where I can see them! Out of the pockets! Now!" Jocelyn slowly pulled her hand out, palms open. "I was getting my phone to show you my boarding pass, or the email, whatever you need." "I don't need to see a fake boarding pass on a cracked iPhone," Roche sneered. "I know the manifest. I know who flies on this plane. Mr. Banks and his associates. Men in suits. Dignitaries. Not," he gestured vaguely at her existence, "not street kids looking for a joyride or a TikTok clout video." "I'm not a street kid," Jocelyn said, her voice hardening slightly. "My name is Jocelyn. If you just call the flight coordinator—" "I'm the captain," Roche interrupted, closing the distance until he was inches from her face. "I am the coordinator, and I am telling you that you are a security threat. You are loitering near a high-value asset. You have refused to identify yourself properly, and you are acting belligerent." "Belligerent?" Jocelyn frowned. "I haven't raised my voice once. You're the one screaming." "Back talk," Roche muttered. He grabbed his radio from his belt. "Tower, this is Global 990. I have a tarmac intruder at my position, requesting immediate security assistance. Possible hostile." Jocelyn's eyes widened. "Hostile? Are you serious? I'm just trying to get on the plane. Check the name. Jocelyn Banks." Roche froze for a split second. The name Banks was on the tail. But he looked at her again. He saw the color of her skin, the clothes she wore, the defiance in her posture. His bias overrode his logic. There was no way this girl was related to Preston Banks, the pharmaceutical tycoon known for his Italian suits and conservative politics. "Nice try," Roche said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You Googled the tail number owner. That just proves you've been stalking this aircraft. That makes you a premeditated threat." "Are you insane?" Jocelyn stepped back, looking around for help. "I'm his daughter." "Liar," Roche hissed. At that moment, Timothy, the first officer, poked his head out of the cabin door at the top of the stairs. "Captain, everything okay? We're on a schedule." "Stay in the cockpit, Wells," Roche yelled without looking back. "I've got a situation here. Breach of security." "But—" Timothy hesitated. He squinted through the rain. He saw a young girl standing there, looking more confused than dangerous. "Cap, she doesn't look—" "I said get back inside!" Roche roared. He turned back to Jocelyn. "You're not going anywhere." Jocelyn took a deep breath, trying to channel the meditation techniques her therapist had taught her. De-escalate, she thought. Just de-escalate. "Okay," Jocelyn said, raising her hand slowly. "Captain Roche, right? I can see your badge. Captain Roche, I have my ID in my backpack. It's a driver's license. It matches the last name on the tail. If you just let me show you, we can stop this." Roche stared at the backpack. It was a bulky, military-style canvas bag. What's in the bag? My laptop, my camera, some books. Camera? Roche's eyes narrowed. Surveillance equipment. You've been taking photos of the aircraft? I'm a film student. It's for my vlog. Jocelyn was losing her patience. Look, just call my dad, Preston Banks. You have his number. Call him. Mr. Banks is currently in transit and is not to be disturbed by nonsense, Roche said. And I'm not letting you reach into that bag. For all I know, you have a weapon in there. Or an explosive. An explosive? Jocelyn laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. It's a backpack. I'm 22 years old. Terrorism doesn't have an age limit, Roche said, reciting a line from a security seminar he'd slept halfway through. He made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for airport security to potter over in their golf cart. He was going to handle this. He was going to secure the asset. Roche lunged forward. "Hey!" Jocelyn shouted, stumbling back. Roche was strong. He grabbed Jocelyn by the wrist, twisting her arm behind her back with a practiced, painful torque. "Ow! You're hurting me!" Jocelyn screamed, dropping to one knee on the wet asphalt. "Stop resisting!" Roche shouted, pressing his weight onto her shoulder. "You are under arrest for trespassing and interfering with a flight crew." "I'm not resisting," Jocelyn cried out, pain shooting up her shoulder. "Let go!" Roche didn't let go. He reached into his back pocket. Because he was paranoid, and because he often flew into unstable regions in South America, Roche carried a tactical kit on his belt. From it, he pulled a pair of heavy-duty yellow plastic flex cuffs, zip ties meant for securing cargo, or, in extreme cases, unruly passengers. "Give me your other hand," he grunted. "No, what are you doing?" Jocelyn struggled, kicking out. Her sneaker squeaked uselessly on the wet tarmac. "Assault!" Roche yelled, though she hadn't touched him. "Assaulting a captain. That's a felony, sweetheart. You're going away for a long time." He wrenched her other arm back. The sound of the plastic zip tie engaging was distinct. Zip. He pulled it tight. Too tight. The plastic bit into the soft skin of Jocelyn's wrists, cutting off circulation immediately. "Get up," Roche ordered, hauling her to her feet by the hoodie. Jocelyn was gasping for air, tears mixing with the rain on her face. She felt humiliated. She looked toward the FBO building, hoping someone had seen, but the tinted windows were dark. "Move!" Roche shoved her toward the stairs. "Where are you taking me?" Jocelyn asked, her voice trembling. "If I'm arrested, shouldn't we wait for the police here?" "I'm not leaving you on the tarmac where you can signal your accomplices," Roche said, his paranoia fabricating a complex plot in real time. "I'm securing you on the aircraft until the authorities arrive to transport you. Move." He marched her up the air stairs. The metal steps were slippery. With her hands bound behind her back, Jocelyn had no balance. She stumbled on the third step, slamming her shin against the metal. She cried out, but Roche just shoved her back upright. They reached the top of the stairs. Chloe, the flight attendant, was standing in the galley. She was a petite woman with blonde hair, holding a tray of crystal tumblers. When she saw Roche dragging a soaking wet, handcuffed black girl into the pristine cabin, she dropped the tray. Crash. Crystal shattered everywhere. "Captain," Chloe gasped, hands over her mouth. "What is going on?" "Intruder," Roche announced, breathing heavily. He felt a surge of adrenaline. He felt powerful. Caught her trying to access the landing gear. Claimed she was a passenger. Chloe looked at Jocelyn. She saw the tears, the terror, and the expensive but casual clothes. Chloe had flown with the Banks family for 3 years. She knew Preston Banks had a daughter, but she had never met her. The daughter usually flew commercial or stayed on the West Coast. But Chloe had an instinct. "Captain," Chloe said, her voice shaking, "are you sure? She has a very expensive bag." "Stolen," Roche barked. Clear that glass, Chloe. Now! Roche shoved Jocelyn past the galley and into the main cabin. The Global 7500 was a palace in the sky. Cream-colored leather seats, mahogany inlays, a divan that cost more than a house. Sit, Roche ordered, pointing to seat 1A, the seat usually reserved for the principal guest. I can't sit with my hands like this, Jocelyn sobbed. Please, just cut them off. I'll sit quietly. I promise. You sit where I tell you and how I tell you, Roche said. He pushed her down. Jocelyn fell awkwardly into the plush leather, her bound hands digging into her lower back. It was excruciating. First Officer Wells, Roche shouted toward the cockpit. Timothy appeared, looking pale. Cap, security is on the radio. They're asking why we haven't responded. Tell them I have the suspect in custody, Roche said, adjusting his tie. Tell them to send a squad car to the plane, and tell them to bring the K9 unit. I want her bag searched for explosives. Jocelyn looked up at Roche. The initial shock was fading, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. She was the daughter of a man who could buy this airport. She was a top-tier law student at Stanford, and she was currently being treated like a terrorist because she wore a hoodie and had the wrong skin tone. You, Jocelyn whispered, her voice steadying. You have made the biggest mistake of your life. Roche laughed. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. Is that a threat? Are you threatening a pilot? Add it to the list, honey. You're done. I'm not threatening you, Jocelyn said, looking him dead in the eye. I'm advising you. Check the passenger manifest. The full name, Jocelyn Alexandra Banks. Roche paused. There was something in her tone. Not fear. Certainty. He snatched the manifest from the side table where Chloe had left it. He scanned the list. Pax Majour. 1. Preston Banks. Pax 2. Jocelyn Alexandra Banks. Roche stared at the paper. Then he looked at the girl, then back at the paper. Common name, Roche muttered, though a bead of sweat tricked down his temple. Means nothing. You probably stole her ID. My face, Jocelyn said through gritted teeth, is on the lock screen of the iPad in the cockpit, the one you use for charts. My dad put it there. Roche felt a cold knot form in his stomach, but he was too deep in. He couldn't back down now. If he admitted he was wrong, he was liable for assault, kidnapping, and false imprisonment. If he doubled down, he could claim he was acting in good faith for the safety of the flight. He had to commit. Lies, Roche said, though his voice lacked its previous thunder. You're a diverse decoy. That's what you are. Suddenly, the plane shook. Not from the wind, from a car door slamming shut outside with the force of a thunderclap. Roche looked out the porthole window. A black Maybach had pulled up right next to the stairs. Not the police, not security. A driver in a suit hurried to open the rear door. A man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a charcoal bespoke suit that cost $5,000. He had silver hair and a presence that made the air seem thinner. It was Preston Banks, and he looked furious. Captain, Chloe whispered from the galley, looking out the window. Mr. Banks is here. Roche swallowed hard. He looked at Jocelyn, who was handcuffed, wet and bruised in seat 1A. Good, Roche said, trying to convince himself. He needs to see how I protected his plane. Roche turned to the door, buttoning his jacket, preparing to greet the billionaire as a hero. He had no idea that the Reaper had just walked up the stairs. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed on the metal air stairs. They weren't the rushed steps of a pilot. They were the measured, authoritative steps of ownership. Captain Roche stood at the entryway of the cabin, chest puffed, a rehearsed speech on the tip of his tongue. He was ready to present the secured threat to his employer, expecting a nod of approval, perhaps a bonus for his vigilance. Preston Banks appeared in the doorway. He was shaking the rain off a cashmere overcoat. He was a man who exuded power without trying. It was in the set of his shoulders, the cut of his jaw, and the terrifying stillness of his grey eyes. He didn't immediately look at Roche. He looked at the shattered crystal on the galley floor. "Chloe," Preston said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the cabin. "Why is my baccarat crystal on the floor?" Chloe, terrified, motioned helplessly towards Roche. "There was an incident, Mr. Banks. Captain Roche." Preston finally turned his gaze to Roche. It was like being looked at by a statue carved from ice. "Captain, explain the incident." Roche stepped forward, saluting faintly. "Mr. Banks, sir. Before your arrival, I intercepted a perimeter breach. An individual attempted to access the aircraft without credentials. I neutralized the threat and secured the suspect aboard the vessel to await authorities." Roche gestured grandly toward the main cabin, like a magician revealing a tiger. Preston walked past him into the cabin. He stopped dead. He saw the figure in seat 1A, the oversized hoodie, the damp braids, the tear-streaked face. And then his eyes locked onto the bright yellow plastic zip ties, binding her wrists tightly behind her back, digging into the soft leather of his custom seat. The silence that filled the cabin was heavier than the 70-ton aircraft itself. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. "Jocelyn!" Preston's voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the voice of a titan of industry. It was the voice of a horrified father. Jocelyn looked up, her eyes red. "Hi, Dad." Preston moved faster than anyone thought a man of 55 could move. He was beside her in an instant, kneeling on the plush carpet. He saw the way her shoulders were twisted, the whiteness of her knuckles where the circulation was cut off. "My God," Preston breathed. He reached out to touch her arm, and she winced. "Did he hurt you?" "He twisted my arm," Jocelyn whispered, her voice cracking. "He threw me on the tarmac. He called me a threat." Preston slowly stood up. When he turned to face Roche, the look on his face would have made a lesser man faint. It wasn't anger. It was total, annihilating destruction. Roche, suddenly sensing the tectonic shift in the atmosphere, stammered. "Mr. Banks." She refused to identify herself. She had no badge. She was loitering. "Be silent," Preston said. The volume didn't rise, but the intensity was paralyzing. "But sir, protocol dictates," I said, "be silent." Preston pointed a finger at Roche, a gesture that felt like a loaded gun. "That is not a threat. That is my daughter. Jocelyn Alexandra Banks, the person you were briefed you would be flying today." Roche felt the blood drain from his face, pooling somewhere in his feet. The manifest, the name he had dismissed, the photo on the iPad he hadn't checked. I didn't know," Roche whispered. "She didn't look like—" He stopped himself, realizing he was about to dig his own grave deeper. "She didn't look like what, Captain?" Preston stepped closer, invading Roche's personal space. "Finish that sentence. She didn't look like someone who belonged on my jet? Why is that? Because she's wearing a hoodie? Or is there another reason you assumed my black daughter was a criminal?" Roche opened his mouth like a fish out of water. No words came out. The hero narrative evaporated, leaving behind only naked prejudice and incompetence. "Get these things off her," Preston commanded, gesturing to the zip ties. "Now." Roche fumbled at his belt for his multi-tool. His hands were shaking so badly he dropped it twice. He finally managed to get the small wire cutters open and approached Jocelyn. "Don't touch her," Preston barked. Roche froze. "Wells!" Preston shouted toward the cockpit. Timothy Wells bolted out of the cockpit like a frightened rabbit. "Yes, Mr. Banks. Cut these off my daughter. If you nick her skin, you'll wish you were never born." Timothy, sweating profusely, carefully snipped the thick plastic. The zip ties sprang open with a loud snap. Jocelyn gasped, as the blood rushed back into her hands. Her wrists were ringed with angry red welts, the skin broken in 2 places. Preston took her hands gently, inspecting the damage. His jaw tightened until a muscle feathered in his cheek. He turned back to Roach. "You put your hands on her," Preston said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You assaulted her. You illegally detained her. You kidnapped her onto my own aircraft." "Mr. Banks, please. It was an honest mistake in the heat of the moment," Roach pleaded, sweat dripping into his eyes. "I was trying to protect your asset." "My asset?" Preston laughed, a cold, harsh sound. "You idiot! She is the asset. This plane is just metal and leather. I can replace this plane tomorrow. I cannot replace my daughter's sense of safety." Sirens finally wailed outside. Blue and red lights splashed across the cabin interior. The airport police had arrived. Roach felt a surge of relief. The police. They would understand protocols. They would de-escalate this. "Thank God," Roach muttered. Preston looked out the window at the arriving squad cars. "Oh, don't thank God yet, Captain. You're about to find out that I'm a much bigger problem for you than the Port Authority police." 2 airport police officers thumped up the stairs, hands resting on their holsters, ready for the hostile intruder they had been radioed about. They stopped short when they saw Preston Banks standing in the middle of the cabin, looking like an avenging angel in an Italian suit. "Mr. Banks?" the lead officer, Sergeant Miller, said, recognizing the billionaire instantly. "We got a call from Captain Roche about a dangerous trespasser secure aboard the aircraft." "There is no trespasser," Preston said, his voice crisp. "There is, however, a victim of assault and false imprisonment. My daughter." He gestured to Jocelyn, who was holding her bruised wrists. Sergeant Miller looked from Preston to Jocelyn, then to the sweating, pale Captain Roach. The dynamic of the situation flipped instantly. "Captain Roach," Miller said, his tone changing from collegial to investigative. "Care to explain why you zip-tied Mr. Banks's daughter?" "I didn't know who she was," Roach cried out, his composure completely gone. "She wouldn't show ID. She was belligerent." "I offered to show you my ID 3 times, Jocelyn said quietly from her seat. Her voice was steady now, fortified by her father's presence. "You told me not to reach for it because I might have a bomb." The police officers exchanged a look. The bomb excuse was the last refuge of a panicked amateur. "Officer," Preston said to Miller, "I want this man removed from my aircraft immediately. I am pressing charges for assault and battery, unlawful restraint, and emotional distress. My legal team is already drafting the complaint." "Understood, Mr. Banks," Miller said. He turned to Roach. "Gregory Roach, turn around and place your hands behind your back." "You can't be serious," Roach sputtered. "I'm the captain of this vessel. I have authority." "Your authority ended the second you laid hands on my daughter," Preston cut in. As the officer clicked real, metal handcuffs onto Roach's wrists, a poetic justice that wasn't lost on anyone. Preston pulled out his phone. "Don't take him away just yet, Sergeant," Preston said. "He needs to hear this call." Preston put the phone on speaker. He dialed a number from memory. It rang once. "Preston, everything all right for the flight?" The voice on the other end was slick and professional. Marcus Sterling, the CEO of the elite aircraft management firm that employed Roach and managed Banks's jet. "Marcus," Preston said, his voice like granite. "We have a problem. A catastrophic failure of personnel." "What happened? Is it mechanical?" "It's your lead pilot, Gregory Roach. He just assaulted my 22-year-old daughter on the tarmac at Teterboro. He handcuffed her like an animal and threw her onto my plane because he decided she didn't look like she belonged here." There was dead silence on the other end of the line. "Marcus, are you there?" "Good God, Preston. Is Jocelyn okay?" Marcus's voice was breathless with panic. He knew the value of the bank's account. It was worth millions a year to his firm. She is bruised and traumatized, and Roche is currently in police handcuffs on my jet. Preston, I don't know what to say. This is unacceptable. Here is what is going to happen, Marcus, Preston said, looking directly at Roche as he spoke into the phone. You are going to terminate Captain Roche's employment immediately, for cause, gross misconduct, endangerment. Consider it done. He's fired as of this second. Roche flinched as if he'd been struck. 30 years of flying, gone in a sentence. Furthermore, Preston continued, I want you to contact the FAA immediately. I want a formal review of his license. I want his medical clearance pulled, pending a psychiatric evaluation for aggression and bias. I want it on record that he is unfit to command an aircraft. I will handle it personally, Preston. You have my word. And Marcus, if I find out he gets a job flying crop dusters in Nebraska, I will pull my entire fleet from your management. Do you understand me? He is done flying, forever. Understood. Loud and clear. Preston hung up the phone. The silence in the cabin was absolute. Roche stood there, cuffed, stripped of his career, his reputation, and his future, in under 5 minutes. He looked small. The arrogant armor of his uniform seemed to hang loosely on him now. You ruined my life, Roche whispered hoarsely at Jocelyn. Preston stepped in front of his daughter, shielding her. You ruined your own life, Captain. You saw a young black woman, and you saw a threat instead of a person. You let your prejudice fly this plane instead of your brain. Now you get to deal with the crash. Preston nodded to the police officers. Take him off my plane. As they began to lead Roche toward the stairs, Jocelyn spoke up. Wait. Everyone stopped. Jocelyn slowly stood up from seat 1A. She winced as she put weight on her bruised shin, but she stood tall. She picked up her canvas backpack from the floor where Roche had kicked it. She dug inside. Roche watched her, a flicker of fear in his eyes. What now? You asked me earlier what was in my bag, Jocelyn said to Roche, her voice calm, almost professorial. You said it was surveillance equipment. You said I was staking out the plane. She pulled out a high-end mirrorless camera fitted with a wide-angle lens. It was expensive gear, the tools of her trade as a film student. I told you I was a film student. I told you I was vlogging. She turned the camera around so the screen faced Roche, Preston, and the police officers. I was filming B-roll of the rain on the tarmac when you started screaming at me, Jocelyn said. I didn't turn it off. I just clipped it to my backpack strap. She pressed a button on the back of the camera. The small, bright screen illuminated the dim cabin. The footage was jerky, angled upward from her hip, but the audio was crystal clear. The roar of the APU was background noise to the hate in Roche's voice. I said, "Stop!" Roche's recorded voice boomed in the quiet cabin. Everyone watched in stunned silence as the entire encounter played out. They heard Jocelyn's calm requests to show ID. They heard Roche's escalating paranoia. Terrorism doesn't have an age limit. They heard the sickening crunch of him grabbing her. They heard Jocelyn scream, "Ow! You're hurting me!" They heard the zip of the handcuffs. They heard Roche's final insult as he dragged her up the stairs. Street kids looking for a joyride or a TikTok clout video. When the video ended, the silence was profound. It wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore. It wasn't his word against hers. It was objective, recorded proof of a man abusing his power based on nothing but bias. Sergeant Miller looked at Roche with undisguised disgust. Well, that changes things from he said, she said, to a slam-dunk felony assault. Preston put a hand on Jocelyn's shoulder, immensely proud of her presence of mind. Make sure that footage is secured as evidence, officer. Count on it, Mr. Banks. Roche looked at the camera, his face grey. He realized that this wasn't just the end of his career. This was going to be on the news. This was going to be viral by the morning. He wasn't just fired, he was about to become a national pariah. "Jocelyn," Roche pleaded, desperation creeping into his voice. "Please, I have a family. If that gets out—" Jocelyn looked at him, her eyes cool and detached. She held up the camera. "You were worried about me making a TikTok video for clout?" Jocelyn said. "Congratulations, Captain Roche. You're about to be the star of the internet. But I don't think you're going to like the reviews." She handed the camera to Sergeant Miller. "Get him out of here," Preston commanded. The officers hauled a defeated, broken Gregory Roche down the air stairs and into the back of the rain-soaked squad car. Inside the Global 7500, Preston turned to his daughter. The powerful billionaire facade cracked, and he pulled her into a crushing hug. "I am so sorry, baby," he whispered into her damp hair. "I am so sorry." Jocelyn hugged him back, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving her trembling. "It's okay, Dad. You handled it." Preston pulled back and looked at her, wiping a tear from her cheek. "No, Jocelyn. You handled it. You were smarter, calmer, and braver than that man ever was. You stood your ground." He looked over at Timothy Wells and Chloe, who were still cowering in the galley, terrified they were next on the chopping block. "Chloe, get my daughter some ice for her wrists and a blanket. Wells, get in the cockpit. You're flying left seat today. Get us to LA." "Yes, sir," they chorused. Preston guided Jocelyn back to seat 1A, helping her sit down gently. "Dad," Jocelyn said softly, as the jet engines began to spool up, a deep vibration running through the floor. "Yeah, sweetie. Did you really mean it? That he'll never fly again?" Preston looked out the window as the squad car drove away with the former Captain Roche. His expression was hard as flint. "Jocelyn, by the time I am finished with Gregory Roche, he won't even be able to rent a car at Hertz." The flight to Los Angeles was the quietest 5 hours Preston Banks had ever experienced aboard his own aircraft. The usual hum of business, conference calls, strategizing, the clinking of ice in glasses, was absent. Jocelyn slept for most of it, curled tightly under a cashmere blanket in the divan area, exhausted by the adrenaline crash. Preston sat across from her, watching her sleep, his work iPad untouched on his lap, while the Global 7500 cruised at 45,000 feet, shielded from the world below. The world below was beginning to burn. Jocelyn had made a decision before the plane even finished taxiing at Teterboro. She hadn't asked her father for permission. She didn't need it. She sat in seat 1A, connected her phone to the jet's high-speed K-band Wi-Fi, and opened Instagram. She didn't add filters. She didn't add sad music. She just uploaded the raw 4-minute video file from her camera with a simple caption. "This morning, the pilot of my own plane, tail number N990PB, decided I looked like a threat instead of a passenger. He twisted my arms, zip-tied me on the tarmac, and told me terrorism doesn't have an age limit. He didn't ask for my ID until after he assaulted me. This is what flying private looks like when you're black in a hoodie. Meet Captain Gregory Roche." She hit post, then she turned off her phone and went to sleep. By the time they crossed the Mississippi River, the video had 50,000 views. By the time they were over the Rockies, it had 2 million. When they touched down at Van Nuys Airport in California, the world had fundamentally changed for everyone involved. The internet did what the legal system takes years to do. It delivered an immediate, irreversible verdict. The juxtaposition was too stark, too visceral to ignore. The gleaming white $70 million jet contrasted against the grey rain. The hulking, uniform-clad man manhandling a young woman half his size, the calm in her voice versus the hysterical paranoia in his. It was a perfect storm of class, race, and power dynamics caught in 4K resolution. Twitter trends were dominated by Captain Roche, Teterboro assault, and flying while black. TikTok detectives had already found Roche's LinkedIn profile, his high school yearbook photo, and a disregarded noise complaint filed against him by a neighbor 3 years prior. Gregory Roche, freshly released on bail from the Port Authority holding cell in New Jersey, returned to his suburban home to find news vans parked on his lawn. CNN was running a segment analyzing the body language in the video. TMZ had a headline that read, "Billionaire Preston Banks' daughter cuffed by rogue pilot." Roche sat in his living room, the blinds drawn, watching his life incinerate on a 60-inch screen. His phone had been ringing non-stop for 4 hours until he finally threw it into a drawer. "They're twisting it, Brenda," Roche said to his terrifyingly silent wife, pacing the carpet. "They're editing it to make me look bad. I was following protocol. The world has gone mad. You can't even protect a plane anymore without being called a racist." Brenda looked at the TV screen, where the footage of him sneering, street kids looking for a joyride, was playing on a loop. "Gregory," she said icily, "you zip-tied Preston Banks's daughter. There is no spin for this. We are going to lose the house." Roche, desperate to regain control of the narrative, made a fatal error. He ignored the advice of the public defender appointed to him and called a local news station that had been sympathetic to him in the past. He agreed to an exclusive interview from his living room the next morning. Preston Banks watched that interview live from his office on the 40th floor in Century City. He stood by the window, overlooking the sprawl of Los Angeles, his hands clasped behind his back. Jocelyn sat on the leather sofa behind him, her wrists still wrapped in light compression bandages. On the massive wall-mounted television, Roche looked sweaty and defensive, wearing a polo shirt that seemed too tight around the neck. "Captain Roche," the anchor asked, "looking at that video, do you feel you overreacted?" "Look, you have to understand the context," Roche said, leaning into the camera, his eyes manic. "Teterboro is a high-target environment. I saw an individual in urban attire, loafing near the landing gear. She didn't fit the profile of our usual clientele. In this day and age, if you see something, you say something. I was protecting Mr. Banks's property. If it had been a real terrorist, I'd be a hero right now." Preston slowly turned away from the window. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Urban attire," Preston repeated quietly. "He just can't help himself, can he?" Preston picked up his desk phone and dialed a number. "Get me Elias Thorne at Latham & Watkins," Preston ordered his assistant. "I don't care if he's in court. Pull him out." 30 seconds later, the managing partner of one of the most feared litigation firms on the planet was on the line. "Preston," Elias Thorne said smoothly. "I've seen the video. My God. How is Jocelyn?" "She's angry, Elias, which means I am apocalyptic," Preston said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I watched that man's interview just now. He's not sorry. He thinks he's a victim of wokeness gone mad. We have grounds for civil assault, battery, false imprisonment, negligent infliction of emotional distress, and defamation per se based on his comments in the interview," Elias listed rapidly. "We can bury him in filings by noon tomorrow." "That's a start," Preston said. "But I want more. I want you to sue the aircraft management company for negligent hiring and supervision. I want you to sue the FBO at Teterboro for inadequate security protocols that allowed this encounter to happen on their ramp. I want you to subpoena Roche's entire employment history, every disciplinary file, every complaint he's ever had in 30 years of flying. If he kicked a dog in 1995, I want to know about it. Preston, that's a scorched earth approach. The legal fees alone will run into the mid-7 figures. Do you think I care about the fees, Elias? Preston asked quietly. I want to send a message to every single person in that industry that if you touch my child based on the color of her skin, my money will not just fight you, it will annihilate you. I want Gregory Roach so buried in litigation that his grandchildren will be paying off the court costs. Make it happen. Preston hung up. He walked over to the sofa and sat next to Jocelyn. Are you okay with this? He asked gently. It's going to get ugly. They'll try to dig up dirt on you too. Jocelyn looked at the TV, where pundits were now dissecting Roche's disastrous use of the phrase urban attire. Let it get ugly, Dad, Jocelyn said, her voice firm. He used his power to hurt me. I want to use our power to make sure he never hurts anyone else. Burn him down. 8 months later. The warehouse outside of Reno, Nevada, smelled of diesel fumes, cardboard dust, and stale coffee. It was 3:00 a.m. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing whine. Gregory Roche hated the sound. He hated the smell. He hated the mandatory steel-toed boots that pinched his toes, a far cry from the polished Italian leather loafers he used to wear in the cockpit. He stood at the end of a conveyor belt at a massive e-commerce fulfillment center, taping boxes. Slice, fold, tape. Slice, fold, tape. The monotony was crushing. He was no longer Captain Roach. He was just Greg, the 56-year-old night shift guy who always looked angry and didn't talk to anyone. His co-workers, mostly 20-somethings trying to make rent, didn't know who he was. They hadn't seen the video. They just knew he used to be a pilot of some kind, and that he carried a heaviness around him like a lead blanket. His life had not just unraveled. It had been surgically dismantled by Preston Banks's legal team. The criminal case had been a nightmare. The video evidence was irrefutable. His lawyer, realizing they were facing a jury pool poisoned by viral outrage, advised him to take a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to simple assault and unlawful restraint to avoid jail time, ending up with 3 years of probation, mandatory anger management therapy, and 500 hours of community service. But the criminal case was a picnic compared to the civil suits. Latham and Watkins hit him with a lawsuit that read like a treatise on human misery. They went after everything. His retirement accounts, his savings, his future earnings. The discovery phase was brutal. They unearthed emails from 10 years ago where he made off-color jokes to co-pilots. They found a complaint from a female flight attendant in 2018 that had been swept under the rug by his old management company. They painted a picture of a man whose arrogance and bias had been ticking time bombs for decades. His wife, Brenda, unable to handle the public shame and the impending financial ruin, filed for divorce 3 months into the ordeal. She took the house, or what was left of the equity, after the lawyers took their share. The FAA emergency revocation of his airline transport pilot license was the final nail in the coffin. He couldn't even fly a Cessna 172 on a Sunday afternoon. His identity, built over 30 years in the sky, was erased. Now he taped boxes. He made $18 an hour. A supervisor, a kid barely 25 with a clipboard, walked by. "Hey Greg, pick up the pace on line 4. You're lagging." Roche's grip tightened on the tape dispenser. The old instinct to bark back, to assert authority, flared up. He swallowed it down. It tasted like ash. "Yeah, got it," Roche mumbled, keeping his eyes down. He taped another box. It was going to someone in Connecticut. He wondered if they flew private. He wondered if they knew that the man securing their toothpaste and toaster oven used to command a $70 million aircraft. Karma hadn't just hit Gregory Roach. It had run him over, backed up, and parked on top of him. Miles away, in a sleek screening room at the Stanford Film School, the lights went down. Jocelyn sat in the back row next to her father. She wore a tailored blazer over a silk t-shirt, her braids pulled up into a sophisticated bun. She looked older than she had on that rainy tarmac 8 months ago. There was a new steel in her spine. On the screen, the title of her senior documentary thesis appeared in stark white letters against a black background. N. Nainananwa, PB. The Invisible Passenger. The film didn't just use the viral footage, it used it as a jumping-off point. Jocelyn had spent the last 8 months interviewing other black professionals about their experiences in elite spaces, private aviation, country clubs, boardrooms. She interviewed sociologists about implicit bias. She interviewed her own father about the reality that even billions of dollars couldn't buy an exemption from prejudice. It was powerful, nuanced, and devastating. When the viral footage played in the documentary, the shaky camera, Roach's shouting, the zip of the cuffs, the audience in the screening room gasped, even though they had all seen it before. Seeing it in the context of her larger film made it hit harder. It wasn't just a viral moment anymore. It was evidence of a systemic rot. As the credits rolled, the room erupted in standing applause. Jocelyn's professors were beaming. Preston leaned over and kissed her on the cheek. "I am so incredibly proud of you." Later that night, they sat on the terrace of Preston's Palo Alto home, overlooking the dark outline of the hills. They were drinking celebratory champagne, the good stuff, Baccarat crystal tumblers intact this time. "I heard about Roach today," Preston said quietly, swirling his glass. Jocelyn looked up. She hadn't spoken his name in months. "Oh, my PI keeps tabs. He's working night shift at an Amazon warehouse outside Reno. Lives in a studio apartment above a garage." Jocelyn processed this. She thought about the man who had loomed over her on the wet tarmac, the absolute certainty in his eyes that she was nothing. She tried to feel satisfaction, a surge of victorious vindication. Instead, she just felt a profound, exhausting sadness. "It's pathetic, Dad," she said softly. "It's just sad. He threw his whole life away because he couldn't handle seeing me in a hoodie. He threw his life away because he thought power meant punching down," Preston corrected. He set his glass down. "You learned a hard lesson that day, Jocelyn. You learned that the world doesn't care about your last name or my bank account when they first look at you. They see what they want to see." "I know," Jocelyn said. She touched the faint, tiny white scar on her left wrist, where the zip tie had broken the skin. It was a permanent reminder. "But you also taught the world a lesson," Preston continued. "You taught them that if they come for you, they better be ready for the war that follows. You didn't just survive that day, baby. You weaponized it. You turned their hate into your art." Jocelyn looked out at the night sky. A plane was passing overhead, its blinking lights a slow-moving star among the real ones. She thought about Captain Roach in his noisy warehouse, taping boxes, grounded forever. "I don't want to talk about him anymore," Jocelyn said, finishing her champagne. "He's the past. I have a film festival to prepare for." Preston smiled, a genuine warm look that reached his grey eyes. "That's my girl. Eyes forward. Always forward. And that is the story of how a $70 million jet, a prejudiced pilot, and a $20 pair of zip ties proved that karma doesn't care about your flight hours. Captain Roach learned the hard way that in the age of smartphones, Your worst moments are just one upload away from ending your life as you know it. He thought he was securing a threat, but he was actually securing his own destruction at the hands of a father with unlimited resources and a daughter with unshakable courage. What do you think? Was the punishment fitting for the crime, or did Preston Banks go too far with his scorched earth revenge? Let me know down in the comments. And if you believe that justice should be served, no matter how much money is involved, smash that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of high-flying drama and hard-hitting karma. Thanks for watching.